X. The room held 400 people, and not one of them expected what was about to happen. X. That's the thing about moments like this. They don't announce themselves. They don't come with warning signs or drum rolls. They just arrive, quiet, almost ordinary, and then the whole world shifts. And afterwards, everyone in that room will spend years trying to explain exactly where they were standing when it happened. X. Zara Mensah had taken the bus that morning. X. Not a rideshare, not a cab. The 8:15 from Scarborough, the one that smells like someone's lunch and stops at every corner between Warden and downtown Toronto. She had a transfer in her jacket pocket, creased and slightly damp, and a name tag clipped to her lanyard that said delegate in block letters. The kind they print for everyone, the kind that tells you nothing about who you actually are. X. She was 24 years old. She had spent 3 years with the Canadian Armed Forces before a medical discharge sent her back to civilian life with a bad knee, a commendation she kept in a shoebox, and a head full of mathematics she had never quite been able to turn off. Numbers had always lived in her the way music lives in some people, not something she did, something she was. X. In the forces she had run logistics calculations in her head faster than the software, and her commanding officer, a tall woman from Winnipeg who didn't give compliments easily, had once told her that Zara's brain was wired differently than everyone else's. She hadn't meant it as a compliment exactly. She meant it as a fact. X. Zara had taken that fact and done nothing glamorous with it. She worked part-time at a print shop in Scarborough and took night courses at a community college, slowly assembling the credits she needed toward a mathematics degree. She wasn't sure anyone would ever take seriously. Her jacket was from Value Village. Her shoes had a small hole near the left toe that she'd covered with black marker. X. She wore her hair natural, pulled back, and she carried a canvas tote bag that said Toronto Public Library on the side because it was the bag she had, not because she was making a statement. X. The conference was called the Annual Symposium on Applied Mathematics and Computational Theory, and it was held every year at a hotel ballroom in downtown Toronto. Scholars from across North America came, published researchers, department heads, the kind of people whose names appeared on the spines of textbooks that Zara borrowed from the library because she couldn't afford to buy them. X. She had been given a delegate pass through a community outreach program attached to the university, a small initiative meant to broaden access, a phrase that sounds generous and sometimes is just a thing institutions say when they want to look like they're doing something without changing anything fundamental. X. Zara had applied not because she thought she belonged there, but because the program covered transit and lunch, and the schedule listed a presentation on optimization theory she had been thinking about for months. X. She sat near the back. X. She chose the seat the way she always chose seats. Close to the exit, clear sightlines, old habit from years of training. She set her tote bag under the chair, took out a small notebook with a broken spiral binding, and waited. X. The morning sessions ran long. A professor from McGill gave a presentation on machine learning applications that was competent and thorough and slightly too long. A researcher from UBC discussed climate modeling. There was coffee and small sandwiches on a tray that Zara ate 3 of because she hadn't had breakfast, and the morning moved the way conference mornings move. Slowly, politely, with a low hum of professional courtesy filling the spaces between ideas. X. And then Dr. Philip Mercer walked onto the stage. X. Dr. Philip Mercer was 58 years old, and he carried himself like a man who had never once questioned whether he deserved the space he occupied. He was the kind of person who had been told he was brilliant so many times, and from such an early age that it had stopped being information and become simply the architecture of his personality. He held a chair at a prestigious American university. He had published extensively. He had awards, fellowships, invitations. When he walked into a room, people shifted slightly to make space, not because he asked, but because something in his bearing assumed it would happen, and the room obliged. He adjusted the microphone, looked out at the audience with the mild, unhurried expression of someone who has given many lectures and expects this one to go much the same way, and he said, "What I'm about to show you has occupied the better part of 3 years of my professional life." The room went quiet in a particular way, the polite quiet of an audience settling in. Zara looked up from her notebook. "This problem," he said, clicking to his first slide, "sits at the intersection of combinatorial optimization and probabilistic graph theory. I have consulted with colleagues at 4 institutions. I have run computational models. I have gone down 14 distinct dead ends. He paused. I am sharing it today not because I have solved it. I am sharing it because I believe it cannot be solved, at least, not with any methodology currently available to us. There was a murmur through the room. This was unusual. Academics didn't typically stand in front of 400 peers and announce defeat. It was either very brave or very strategic, and with someone like Mercer, you could never entirely be sure which. He displayed the problem on the screen behind him. Zara looked at it. And something happened in her brain that she had never been able to fully explain to anyone, a kind of snapping into focus, the way a lens finds its target and everything blurs and then suddenly sharpens, and you see the thing so clearly you wonder how you ever missed it. She felt it behind her eyes, a small, almost physical click. She looked at the problem for perhaps 12 seconds. Then she looked back down at her notebook and wrote 2 lines. She stared at those 2 lines for a moment, turned the notebook sideways, wrote one more thing, and stopped. She sat with that for a while. Around her, the room was listening to Mercer explain the history of the problem. The various approaches he and his colleagues had attempted, the reasons each had failed. His voice was measured and authoritative and not unkind, but there was something in the way he inhabited the stage that suggested the possibility of other people having useful thoughts on this subject had not seriously occurred to him. Near the end of his presentation, he opened the floor. If anyone has questions, he said, or thoughts on possible approaches, though I want to be clear, I have reason to doubt any approach that hasn't already been attempted. And he smiled slightly at this, a small, self-deprecating smile that wasn't entirely self-deprecating. I'm happy to hear them. Several hands went up. A man in the 3rd row asked about a specific computational model. A woman near the window asked about the probabilistic weighting. Mercer answered efficiently, with the ease of someone who has thought about these things longer than anyone else in the room. Zara's hand went up. Not quickly. She raised it the way you raise your hand when you're not entirely sure you should, when part of you is aware of everything the gesture might cost, and you do it anyway because you did the math, and the math said it was right. Mercer's gaze moved to the back of the room and found her. Something crossed his face. Not hostility exactly, but a kind of recalibration. He had not, his expression suggested, been expecting new information from the back rows. Yes, he said. I think I have something, Zara said. Her voice was even. She had learned in the forces to make her voice even when her hands were not. It's a different entry point. Not through the probabilistic structure, through the combinatorial side, but approaching the constraint set differently. Mercer looked at her. What's your background? It was not technically a relevant question, but it was the question he asked. Mathematics, she said, and logistics. Are you faculty? No. Graduate student? No. A small silence. Mercer nodded, in the way people nod when they are deciding how much patience to extend. All right, he said. Go ahead. I'd rather write it, she said. May I come up? Another pause, slightly longer. 400 people were watching. Zara was already standing up. She walked to the front of the room the way she had walked into difficult situations before. Not slowly, not quickly, just steadily, as if the ground under her feet was reliable. She was aware of people watching. She was aware of the hole in her shoe. She was aware that her name tag said delegate and nothing else. She walked up the 3 steps to the stage, and Mercer handed her the marker because there was, at that point, not much else to do. She wrote on the whiteboard. She did not explain as she wrote. She did not turn around to check the room. She wrote the way she had always done mathematics, directly, without ceremony, the way you would write a note to yourself if you were simply recording something you already knew. It took 4 minutes. When she put the marker down and stepped back, the room was very quiet. A young man near the middle, a graduate student she would learn later, leaned forward in his seat. He had been following along. His face had changed. Wait, he said to no one in particular. Is that? Yes, someone else said. Mercer had not moved from where he was standing. He was looking at the whiteboard with an expression Zara could not entirely read and did not particularly need to. She had seen the expression before, not on his face but on others, the expression of a person encountering something true that they had not expected to come from the direction it came from. X. He moved closer to the board. He studied it. A minute passed, then another. The room waited in the specific way that rooms wait when something important is being confirmed. X. This is, Mercer started. He stopped. He looked at Zara. This is a constraint relaxation I didn't consider. X. It's a reframing, she said. Once you reframe the constraint set, the optimization path becomes fairly direct. X. Fairly direct, he repeated, in a tone that might have been sarcasm and might have been something else entirely. X. A woman in the fourth row, a researcher Zara didn't know, was already writing. Someone else pulled out a laptop. The graduate student in the middle was nodding, slowly, still looking at the board. X. Can I ask you something? Mercer said. X. Sure. X. How long did that take you? X. Zara thought about whether to answer honestly. X. She answered honestly. About 12 seconds to see it. 4 minutes to write it out properly. X. Mercer was quiet for a moment. Then he said 3 years. X. Not angrily, not defensively, just stating it. 3 years of his professional life, and she had seen it in 12 seconds on a Tuesday morning on a delegate pass in a borrowed jacket. X. The entry point matters, she said. You were inside the probabilistic structure. From inside, you can't see the edge of it. You needed someone who came at it from outside. X. Whether or not Mercer heard the second layer of that sentence, Zara didn't know. But several people in the room did. She could see it in their faces. X. She handed him back the marker. X. She walked back down the 3 steps, past the 4th row, the 8th row, the 14th. She sat down in her seat near the exit. She picked up her notebook. She was aware that people were looking at her, that the room had the buzzing, slightly disoriented energy of a place where something unexpected has happened, and everyone is still working out what to do with it. X. The session ended 20 minutes later. The moderator thanked Dr. Mercer, announced a break, and mentioned, briefly, with notable care, that the contribution from the floor would be acknowledged in the conference proceedings. X. In the hallway, 3 people came up to Zara before she reached the coffee table. The first was the graduate student from the middle of the room, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses who introduced himself as someone finishing a PhD at University of Toronto. He said he had never seen anyone do that. He said it exactly like that. I have never seen anyone do that. With a kind of frank astonishment that Zara appreciated because it didn't perform anything. It was just what he said. X. The second was the researcher who had been writing in the 4th row, a woman from Waterloo who asked Zara if she was applying to graduate programs. And when Zara said she was still finishing her undergraduate credits, the woman went quiet for a moment and then wrote her email address on the back of a business card and said, "Please use this." X. The third was a man Zara didn't recognize who told her that what she'd done was impressive and asked if she was a delegate from which university, and when she said she was there through a community outreach program, he nodded and moved on. That happened too. That is part of the story. X. Zara put the business card in her tote bag, poured herself a coffee, and took it to a window at the end of the hallway that looked out over King Street. The afternoon light was coming in flat and gray the way it does in Toronto in late October, and the streetcars were moving below, and the city was doing what cities do, continuing entirely without regard for what had just happened inside one particular ballroom on one particular Tuesday. X. She drank her coffee. X. She thought about the problem. She thought about the way the constraint set had opened up the moment she stopped looking at it from the inside. She thought about her commanding officer in the forces, who had told her once that the most dangerous assumption in any operation was assuming you already knew which direction the solution would come from. X. She thought about the 3 years. X. She would tell you clearly if you asked her, angry. Anger was an energy she had learned to convert into something more useful. What she felt was something quieter and more complicated, a kind of understanding of the distance between where she was and where she could have been, and also, at the same time, a complete refusal to let that distance define what came next. X. She had not gone to that conference to prove anything. She had gone because the transit was covered, and there was a session on optimization theory she wanted to see. She had raised her hand because the mathematics was right, and she knew it was right, and there was no version of herself that could sit quietly with a wrong answer on a whiteboard when she knew what the right one was. X. That's what people sometimes miss about moments like this. They want them to be about something large, about justice, about representation, about the weight of history in a room. And those things are there. They are always there, layered into every moment like a frequency most people have learned not to hear. But underneath all of it, in the place where Zara actually lived, it was simpler than that. X. It was about the math. X. The math had been sitting there, unresolved, for 3 years, and then she looked at it, and now it wasn't. X. She took the 4:45 bus back to Scarborough. She had homework due. She had a shift at the print shop the next morning. She had a notebook with a broken spiral binding and a business card in her tote bag and a head full of mathematics that had never once waited for permission. X. She got on the bus. She found a window seat. She opened her notebook to a clean page. X. And she kept going. X. I keep thinking about that bus ride home. X. Not the whiteboard, not the 400 people sitting in that room, not even Mercer's face when he stood there and said 3 years like the words surprised him on the way out. I keep thinking about Zara on the 4:45, notebook open, pen moving, the city sliding past the window like none of it had happened, like she'd just gone somewhere, done something that needed doing, and now she was moving on to the next thing, because for her, that's exactly what it was. X. That's the part people miss when they hear a story like this. They want it to be a victory lap. They want the music to swell. And look, something did happen in that room, something real. But Zara wasn't thinking about what it meant. She was thinking about the next problem. X. There's something in that I've been sitting with ever since. X. We talk a lot about talent, about being gifted, about raw intelligence, about seeing things other people can't. And Zara had that, genuinely, undeniably. But talent without integrity is just a party trick. The reason she raised her hand in that room wasn't to impress anyone. It wasn't to prove a point about who gets taken seriously in academic spaces, even though that point was sitting right there in the air, obvious to everyone. X. She raised her hand because the answer was wrong, and she knew the right one, and she couldn't in good conscience sit quietly while a wrong answer went unchallenged. That's not ambition. That's just honesty. That's character, the kind you can't fake, the kind that shows up in the small moments before anyone's watching. X. And then there's what she actually did at that board. 4 minutes. Clean, direct, no performance. The solution came from a place that Mercer, for all his credentials and years and institutional weight, couldn't reach, not because he wasn't smart, but because he was too deep inside the structure of the problem to see its edges. Zara came at it from outside. X. From logistics, from systems thinking, from years of solving practical problems under pressure, where the cost of being wrong wasn't a missed publication, but something much heavier. Real-world thinking had sharpened her mind into something the Academy didn't fully have a category for. Intelligence isn't one shape. It never has been. X. But here's the thing I come back to most. She almost didn't raise her hand. She sat with it. She checked her work twice. She thought about what it would cost. And then she did it anyway, not recklessly, not to make a scene, but because she had decided, somewhere along the way, that she was not going to make herself smaller for the comfort of a room that hadn't made space for her. That takes something. That takes the kind of steadiness that doesn't come from confidence in how things will go. X. It comes from being clear about who you are, even when the room is looking at you like you've made a mistake just by walking in. X. Zara Mensah got on a bus in Scarborough with a borrowed jacket and a broken notebook, and she walked into a room of 400 people, and she did the thing that needed doing. No announcement, no credentials, just the work. X. I don't think that's a small thing. I think that's everything.